Hello and welcome back to my podcast on the history of Georgian art. Today we are going to talk about medieval Georgian sculpture, which is inseparable from medieval Georgian architecture. Well, I would say rather they are inseparable from each other. As most of you probably know, Orthodox Christian theology does not allow independent sculpture in its worship like it is in Roman Catholic Church. So when we speak about sculpture in Orthodox Christian tradition, we necessarily mean that it is attached to the church, to the wall, supporting wall, which makes it relief sculpture. So the chronological line of the development of medieval Georgian relief sculpture coincides with the way Georgian medieval architecture developed. Like there are stages of development, like early stage, which is from the 4th to the 7th century, and then this transitional period, 8th, 9th centuries, and then the golden age of Georgian art, 11th to 13th centuries, and then later period from the 14th century onwards. Now, the earliest examples we have in relief sculpture in Georgia dates back to the 5th century. Maybe there were earlier examples, but they haven't been preserved. So whatever we have preserved, it's 5th century. And one of the first examples of relief sculpture is from the church Bolni Sissioni. If you remember, I told you about this first Georgian basilica, which had no decorations from outside, but inside it's quite heavily decorated with relief sculptures. Now, you see here, there are some kind of images which are mainly symbolic, like zoomorphic images, animals. And there are some crosses, and they are basically symbols. They speak in a symbolic language. Well, it's difficult, it's hardly thinkable to think that there may be hunting scenes in a church, because it is a church. So of course, we're not talking about hunting compositions there. So when we see, like, for example, here, I think it's this top one, you see a deer trapped between two lions. So the symbolic meaning of it is most likely to be the danger of a soul which is threatened by sins or by mortality, and these lions are kind of scary animals, dangerous for a Christian soul. As about execution, the way it is executed, the style, you see that the relief is rather low here. It's not very high, it's not rounded, it's flat. Well, it is raised from its supporting wall, from its supporting background, of course, but the surface of the figures themselves are on a flat kind of level. So there is no rounding. And if you look closely at the lion's mane, there is, of course, very obviously Sasanian Iranic influence in the way it is carved. The decorative carving, the kind of graphic lines on the lion's mane, as you see, create some kind of decorative expression, and it's very typical for Iranian art. Well, in early Georgian relief sculpture, you can see influences of Sasanian Iran or Hellenistic influences as well. Like If you also remember, we spoke about the monastery of the Holy Cross in Mtskheta, which is standing on which has a very interesting location. It's standing on top of a hill and looking down from there. And the facade decoration of the monastery of the Holy Cross, it's very, very interesting. Now, if you look here, I'm trying to make sure that if you look here, it's on top of the main entrance, this composition of the elevation of the Holy Cross. There are two angels holding this cross put in a circle, which we call Bolnisi cross. In kind of, it's very traditional Georgian symbol, let's say. Now, the figures here show a tendency of being more rounded, and the drapery of their clothes shows some kind of influence of Hellenistic Greek carving. And the composition is rather dynamic and expressive, but it's still an early stage. Apart from this composition, there are, sorry, I want to show you the way it is put in on outside on the eastern facade, where this protrusion is coming from the apse of the altar of the sanctuary. And on top of, can you see it? Is it okay? On top of the windows of the altar from outside, this line or ribbon, let's say, of ornamental ribbon is laid out across all three windows, on top of which you see separate compositions. Sculptural compositions. These people in these compositions are sponsors, the people who commissioned, who ordered to build this church. There is Stephanos, the Prince Stephanos I, standing in front of Jesus Christ. And there is also, I don't know if you can see here or not here, but there is also this inscription. And I have to say that inscriptions play a very important role in relief sculpture, because they are usually put in a compositional, I mean, they become part of the composition rather than just saying this or that, which is also very important, because sometimes they are telling us what and who is shown here on this composition, who is depicted, and also sometimes they give us dates of when the church was built, and other times they are just supplications for the soul of someone who built this church or ordered for the church to be built. Now, when you look at these relief sculptures on the monastery of the Holy Cross on the facade, you have an impression that they serve not just the purpose of decoration, but they also serve the purpose of uniting the church and kind of unification of the whole body, architectural body, in one whole, kind of integrating them together. This whole, let's say, architectural sculpture, if I may say so. Because if you remember, when we spoke about Georgian architecture, I told you about that Georgian architects very often treat the church building itself as a sculpture. They are not just building a building, kind of constructing a building, but they are also making sure that it has some kind of chiaroscuro effect. It is it is like molding, like shaping it, which they are quite excited about. And relief sculpture serves very much increase of this effect, of this impression. If you remember also, when I spoke in the first session, I told you about this Georgian painter, Georgian artist David Gagabadze. And one of the interesting things he said about ornament, this traditional Georgian architectural ornament, he said that the reason why ornament emerged, decor, is not just to decorate something and embellish and make it beautiful, but it's because the artist or architect or, yes, artist, basically, sculptor, wanted to make the wall, kind of grant the wall an impression of space, to cut the space through the wall. And they were not satisfied just by plain flat wall. They wanted to bring in some kind of impression of space and movement and dynamics, which relief sculpture is probably the best way to do it. Now, this time, this early stage, also demonstrates something quite unique, which is quite pretty unique for this time, early time. There are lots of stone crosses. It may remind you of Celtic cross when you look at these crosses, and they were usually put in this bases, which now they are separated, and because of this, damages. We don't exactly know what their purpose was, why people made this stone crosses. Were they landmarks for gravestones? We don't really know that. They might have some liturgical connotation, some liturgical purpose or function. Well, most probably they were like kind of glorifying the Calvary cross, which is, the most logical explanation. Now, if you look at this cross, you may find it decorative, and these were together, it was like an ensemble, they say, kind of one whole thing. And usually this supporting base was covered with reliefs, compositions depicting either the feasts of the Lord or the lives of saints, and usually the compositions went from the bottom. The narrative, the storytelling was going from the bottom to the top, and was crowned with something like this, like elevated cross or some kind of heavenly realm, something expressing this heavenly order. Now here, if you look at these angels holding this cross inside, yes, it is quite decorative, we have to admit, and the relief carving is quite low, and there are all lots of kind of conventionalism going on, but there is also so much movement in it. If you look at this drapery and the way they kind of so accurately these little lines are carved, they create some kind of circular motion around this circle inside, which is holding the cross. So this desire for movement and for liveliness, for expression, is the main concept which is part of the development of the Georgian art, not just the sculpture. And when we speak about goldsmiths in the future and metalwork, I am going to tell you that there are similar tendencies there too. Like they begin in the early stage, they begin from a low relief, let's say, and then it goes up and goes a bit kind of rounded, and then there is a period of decline afterwards. And it is the same thing happening in sculpture. Well, some scholars say that it happens because Orthodox theology does not allow the round sculpture, the independent sculpture. So when the artists tried to achieve this roundness of the reliefs, they kind of found themselves in almost a dead end, because what happens next? You can't really take the sculpture out of the wall because it's going to be an independent sculpture and it's not part of Orthodox theology. But, well, maybe so, but relief sculpture is a relief sculpture anyway, so it cannot be separated from the wall. That's the reason why it is relief. Now, when I talk to you about architecture, we mentioned there that 8th and 9th century, well, beginning of 10th, too, is a transitional period in Georgian history, not just in Georgian art. And because of this, this period is marked with great difficulties for Georgia. Georgian history, politics, economy is going kind of very, we had lots of difficulties. Arab invasions followed by Arab rule, and Georgia was divided into small principalities. But besides and in spite of all that, Georgians never stopped searching for their own identity, which showed mostly in artistic efforts. And also there were monastic centers flourished in this period of time. And they also adopted the role of educational centers, those monasteries. And lots of artists sought their education there too. Now, one of the well, actually, it's also time when in Byzantium is taken over by iconoclasm. And lots of scholars, including great Ivan Ejabashvili, believes that Georgia was never part of it, that there was never iconoclasm in Georgia. And maybe, it may be that iconodules from Byzantium even found their shelter here. And also because, well, some people suggest that it may be, I mean, it's also all kind of speculation, you know, we think that it may be the reason why it happened this way or that way, because there was no import of images anymore from Byzantium, because iconoclasm forbade all that veneration of icons and images. Because there was no import from Byzantium, Georgians began to search for their own and began to try to make something unique and something local. And that may be why this period is marked with so much experiments, and they are trying new things and very, very strange things sometimes. Sometimes you may find really kind of very, very unusual decisions, artistic decisions made. And sometimes you may think that, oh, it's just some kind of childish and naive, and it's not really very great, you know, in terms of skill. But it may not be because of the skill, or not because the artist is not good enough. But it is because he's looking for something new, for something unusual, for something different. Now, one of the relief sculptures of this time, well, some people date it with 10th century, but some people say that it's 9th century. It's a relief sculpture of King Ashot Kurabalati. Bagrat, who is a founder of Bagrationi dynasty. Can you see that? Is it visible in the... I'm trying to adjust it to the camera. Is that okay? So Ashot Kurapalati, the king in the 9th century, who became the founder of Bagrationi dynasty, he's depicted here on the relief tile from Opiza Monastery, which is in present-day Turkey. And you see here in the corner a hand, which is apparently coming from the other tile, which was supposed to be next to it. This tile is taken from its original location and is now at the museum in Georgia. Here, King Ashot is standing in front of Jesus, and he is offering to him this model of the church of Opiza Church, where this whole relief was made initially. And as you see, it is put almost in a frame, slightly raised, and the figure is also slightly raised from the background. And you see here, this frame is not exactly a frame, but it is part of the other tile. And it's basically part of the throne on which Jesus is sitting on the other one. Well, unfortunately, I don't have the other one to show you here. But that's the thing. When you look at this, the main impression is that there is some kind of simplicity and almost naive expression. It even looks a bit like a cartoon, doesn't it? Parts of the body which are disproportionate on purpose. Again, hands, feet, enlarged. They have some theological meaning behind it. Actually, every time I look at this sculpture, this relief sculpture, I always remember one story. I used to go to expeditions a lot when I was younger. So once we went to Glargeti Castle in Turkey, where the grave of Ashot Kurapalati is. And among the members of our group, were two people, siblings, brother and sister, from Bagrationi family. I mean, their surname is Bagrationi, and they are descendants of the royal family. And they live as just ordinary people. We are friends, so we never think about these things, usually. And suddenly, I overheard their conversation, and the sister was telling her brother, Georgi, did you forget to put flowers on Grandpa's grave? Suddenly, I was absolutely stunned. It felt like surreal, some kind of something surreal. Grandpa, so this man is a grandpa to them. And, this may be just a funny kind of thing, but at the same time, it made me think how close our history is to us, and that we are part of the history too. So the people who lived long, long, long before us are actually our ancestors, not mine personally, but so we are bound to each other, and artistic expression is a very good place for meeting of different generations. Now, the next, the 10th century after this, the end of this transitional period has more tendency towards rounded sculpture. Going towards, raising more. This relief is more raised from the supporting background. Now, if you look at this eagle on the facade, on one of the facades of Ishani Cathedral, is also in present-day Turkey. It is almost like a round sculpture, isn't it? It feels like it's going to be separated from the wall soon, but at the same time there is still some kind of conventional elements, like the feet are seen from a different angle, and this kind of there are some kind of uncertainties going on. Now the other one I wanted to show you is Oski Church, also in present-day Turkey, which, if I find it, yes, here. Also, the tendency of rounded sculpture. You see the facade shows here archangels, which unfortunately are beheaded by some vandals. But still, it shows you these figures are coming out of the wall almost. It's very, very high relief. It's almost haut relief. But the trouble here with this transitional period is again that there is no integration as much as in later times. Like they are almost kind of scattered around and they are separated from one another, and there is no compositional integrity. Now, next period, from the 11th century onwards, it is a time of glory in Georgian history. The Golden Age or Georgian Renaissance, or all kinds of epithets are used for it. This is a time when Georgia is united. It is strong, powerful, and glorious, kind of majestic. And architecture, arts, and sculpture as well are obviously manifesting this kind of celebration or celebratory mood. It is this time when iconostasis of inside churches also become heavily decorated with relief sculptures. And this sculptural decor itself, ornament, becomes rather complex. And I would say complex and quite amazing. Very dynamic, very fine carving, but carving can be fine, but there is also some kind of drama going on here. Not just fine, I mean fine not in a mechanical kind of way. There is also it is very dynamic, very lively, and it shows the excitement of an artist with what he's making. He's almost having fun by each of these lines and details, let's say. It is this time when architecture also becomes, facades become very heavily decorated, and also, if you see, kind of these rosettes are so well carved. Sometimes I feel like the master is not lazy to make all these details. He's doing it with enormous love and care. He really enjoys making these ornaments. There is something that shows that. Well, if you look very, very closely, you may discover that there are no two things in these ornaments absolutely identical. They always differ, always. There is always something different. And that gives it a special sense of liveliness and dynamism. This is Sant'Avisi Cathedral. What I told you earlier about this sculpturalness, use of arcades also brings in this sense of relief, sculpture in terms of architecture, kind of architectural sculpture rather than compositional kind of. It's not just a separate little thing, but the church itself becomes a sculpture for an architect. Do you see what I mean? This interplay of shade and light, it makes it more interesting, let's say. If there was, just imagine, if there was just a plain flat wall, it would be a bit boring, dull, you know, not interesting. And it's not just because of decoration, but it's because of making it almost a living body, you know, it's kind of breathes, it's alive, it becomes alive. It is, after all, the manifestation of the body of Christ, because that's what the church means. So it is a place of worship where the body of Christ is gathered in the church. Okay, yes, that's what we just saw, St. Tabisi Cathedral. Sorry, I don't want to miss anything out. That's why I'm trying to be very careful. Yes, after this golden age, Georgia is suffering again. The period of decline, another decline in Georgia history, due to multiple invasions of Mongols, followed by a Mongol yoke for a very long time, like the whole century, and then followed by another invasion of Tamerlane, did not make any good influence on the church architecture. So this later period, which, I mean, here it's the 14th century, but look, yes, these churches are decorated again, but do they look as alive as the earlier ones? There is some kind of mechanical dryness noticeable in these ornaments, you know, almost as if they were made in factories, and it's like almost a duty to put them there. And they serve, what they serve is that let's embellish this church, let's kind of decorate this church, no longer bring in the spirit of life in it, but just, yeah, nothing is wrong with it, you know, it's still a very admirable thing to do, to decorate and make beautiful the place of worship. What's wrong with that? But the power and energy that was coming from the earlier ones, the earlier churches, I mean this from especially the Golden Age, is no longer traceable here. Very sadly, of course. But you can't really blame them because they had so much on their plate, you know. Now, one of the other later churches that I really, really want to show you, I mentioned it last time, but I didn't have a chance to show you all the... kept it, yes. It's an Ananuri church, which is dated to the 17th century. It's, you know, we Georgians are spoiled because we have these wonderful things dated to the 5th century. Then we are not appreciating enough what happens in the 17th. And 17th we call, oh, it's early, it's late, it's a later time. It's not interesting, you know, it's just some later thing. While these later things can be very powerful and very, very nice and really very amazing. However, when you look at these relief sculptures of Ananuri Church, there is a different aesthetics. Aesthetics and taste has changed a lot. There is still a kind of desire for rounded kind of form and shape. There is still theology, of course, Orthodox theology, but I do notice some kind of almost Mongol influence, you know, this ogid, yes, ends. These pointed ends, even in the end of the cross. And there is the other one I wanted, yes, this one is even clearer. This one, this arch, the shape of it is obviously kind of Eastern style, isn't it? Even the decoration, this abundant kind of decor, is coming from some kind of Eastern taste, which is very powerful and very, very pretty to look at. But the change of aesthetics is very obvious, I think. Even the tiger, there was a tiger symbol. Can you see the tiger? Even the tiger has this very kind of Mongol-looking mustache, doesn't it? Well, they say that it's all folklore, Georgian folklore, that's sneaked into this decor. Yes, it is true, but also I think the influence in the folklore is quite obvious too. Which is great. It is a great thing because, as I told you earlier, Georgians are very good at adopting foreign influences and put them in their own system, you know. Yes, we do have some kind of pointed arches, but they are serving Orthodox theology, you know. They are serving Orthodox Church. So what? It's still Georgian, it's still a Georgian master making all that. So it's very interesting. This church, if you find yourself in Georgia, please do go to Ananuri Church. It's very near Tbilisi, so it's not to be missed out. Now, speaking of later, and things which were made later, and being somehow dissatisfied with it, which I can't hide, I am, especially, I mean, the 20th and 21st centuries. Now, look, this is a Kashveti church, which I like very much, and I love it very, very much. I have some kind of sentimental feelings about it too, not just in terms of art, but also it's very close to me and to my heart. But when you look at it again, do you feel that much liveliness, dynamism, movement, and being moved as you would feel with the previous relief sculptures or church decorations? And if I show you something even more explicit, more obvious, wait, sorry, I'm lost here, but I shall find it, yes, here. Now, capital of a pillar somewhere, dated to 2005, so it's a very rather recent thing. I would not say that there is anything wrong with it. It's very, I mean, I appreciate and, you know, respect work that somebody put in it. Somebody has worked and toiled a lot to make this. But this shows to me, and what worries me is that it is made as a kind of not exact copy, but the idea of copying the past, what our ancestors were making in the past. And I do believe that when our ancestors were making what they were making in those days, they were not feeling obliged, and it was not a duty or a job for them to copy or imitate something. It was not a mimetic thing to do in that sense. But they did it because they could not do otherwise. That was a very, it is a very essence of creative work. You are an artist if you do, and when you do something, because you cannot not do it the way you do. But when you do something as a duty and something that's kind of, you feel like that's how you have it to do, this turns into a skill rather than art. And sadly, today, most of church artists in painting, architecture, sculpture, they have this kind of duty because that's all we know about how it has to be done. But I want to express my hope that one day or some days, Georgian artists will find their unique way of expressing themselves in a modern and unique style, which will be natural for, and not natural, but more kind of true to oneself, first of all. So on this note, I am ending my today's podcast. And if you enjoyed it, please don't forget to subscribe and like my channel. Thank you. Bye for now.